Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Dawn Mooney Show. I am so excited to see you for the new year, the first episode we've had for the new year. And when I tell you that you're going to love my guest tonight, you're going to love my guest tonight because he is a speaker, an entrepreneur, an author. He has written the best-selling book, How to Be a Productivity Ninja, as well as How to Have Energy, How to Be a Study Ninja. He is going to be spilling some of his secrets with us tonight. Can't wait to bring him on. Please welcome my guest, Graham Allcott.
Thank you.
The crowd goes wild, Graham, because you are pretty amazing with some of the stuff that you put in this book. But first of all, thanks for joining me. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, good to be here. And I'm still working out why you need 2 copies of my book to be doubly productive.
One for me and one to loan out because it's...
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah, it's that good. So I have to let people in on an alternate bio that you put in here. And I think this is hilarious. So I told you he's an entrepreneur, podcaster, speaker, does a lot of other things that we haven't even gotten to yet. But here is one version of the bio. Graham is one of the laziest and most impatient people he knows. He hates anything that takes longer than it needs to. And spending 5 minutes in a queue is a recipe for self-combustion. Despite being the author of a book called How to Be a Productivity Ninja, Graham's own productivity is variable. He is allergic to detail of any description and will regularly do the exact opposite of the things he talks about in his book. He then remembers he wrote a book about it and follows his own advice again. Repeat cycle. So I love, first of all, that you are having a little fun at your own expense here. But what was the light bulb moment that you would say, you know what, I got to write a book about time management? And then as somebody who has somewhat of, productivity challenges in their life, where do you even start?
Yeah, well, the reason for that slightly poking fun at myself bio is that specifically on my website for conferences, because I just really hate that sort of very self-congratulatory, smug conference bio thing, and the fact that everyone's pretending that someone else wrote it, but everyone's just writing it in the third person about themselves and all of that. And so I just thought, why don't I just do like an alternative bio? And it sort of goes on to say that my career trajectory looks very good in hindsight, but I was making it up as I went along at every point. And all of that really speaks to why I wrote Productivity Ninja, which is that I realized that I personally wasn't good at productivity. My own brain is quite scattered and ideasy and not very organized. And I needed to work on myself and figure out my own productivity. And having done that, and having thought when I did so that I was the last person in the world to solve this problem, I started talking to people about how, hey, I've got this new system for email, and hey, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And everyone just went, wow, I need that. And that's where the idea for the book came from, How to Be a Productivity Ninja. And also my business, Think Productive. So we've got offices in the States and Canada, in the UK, in Western Europe, in Australia, and now in Dubai. And what we do is we work with some of the brightest and best organizations in the world to help them with this stuff, with getting more stuff done, with getting clarity, with introducing better cultures around communication and leadership and everything else. And yeah, so it really came from me recognizing my own failings, doing something about it, and then sort of recognizing that, the bit that I'm good at is designing the systems, right? So having the ideas, designing systems, that became then very useful. And I meant what I put in that alternative bio, I don't always get it right. So I will occasionally have days where I really don't practice what I preach. And then, I've kind of forgotten my best practices. And then I'm like, oh, there's a better way here. Like, I know how to do this. And so I think that's reassuring, hopefully, for people to hear, is that we shouldn't try and be perfect. We should recognize that there's always going to be limitations to what we can do. We're always going to have bad days. And that doesn't really matter as long as we know when we've fallen off the wagon that it's very easy to get back on. And so that's really, where the whole thing came from.
A good news situation where if you get into a bad spot, you can always, as you said, get back on the wagon. So let's talk about the information that you're pulling together for this book, because clearly you're trying to tap into the minds of not only yourself, but other people. And what causes them to lose sight, to not be as centered and not be as productive. So, what are some of the key factors that you notice that were limiting people with their productivity?
Yeah, so I think lots of people focus on time management, and what's much more important is to focus on attention management, right? So, how do we manage our attention? And the power in that question is recognizing that not every hour of your attention is equal. So, we have a certain number of hours in the day, which I call proactive attention, which is basically where we have our best energy, our innate ability to do really fantastic work. And then we also all have some hours in the day where it's like we're a bit tired, we're not actually that productive, we feel a bit groggy, we're looking at the email inbox and kind of scrolling up and scrolling down and not really doing anything. And recognizing that we all have those variable levels of attention is very powerful, because once we recognize that, we can figure out when they are. And also we can set up our to-do lists and our systems to say, hey, this is the work that really needs my fullest attention. And this is the slightly mindless work. And this is the bits in the middle. And it then becomes much more easy to allocate the right kind of jobs to the right kind of attention levels. So that's something that I see, certainly most people not doing. And when I coach people and they start doing that, just makes a huge difference. So there's obviously a lot more to it than that in terms of how people deal with procrastination and interruptions and lots of stuff. But I think, fundamentally, part of my mission in life really is to get people to stop thinking about time management and really start thinking about attention management instead.
Really interesting perspective. And coming from a person, and we joked before we got on here, I constantly struggle with time management, which caused a little snafu with my time of getting on here. And it really is, for me, it's always like that is the biggest thing that I can look at. And hearing what you said, and kind of not necessarily the flip side, but another view, really does change that methodology of how you approach things. So the good news is we talked about this. There's help. How do we start? If people are out there and like, I need this, I need to get more productive. What are some of the first baby steps that we can take to get us on that path?
Yeah. So if your starting point for this is you're feeling a bit overwhelmed and stressed and there's too many emails and there's too much stuff, one of the best things you can, often in that moment, what we want to do and our temptation is to just start something, just work on something and I'll feel better. And the hardest thing to do when you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed is actually to do nothing, take a step back and get everything that's in your head out of your head. So get a pen and paper, or get a Word document or a Google Doc or something, and just get everything out of your head onto the page. And by doing that, you will find it much easier to then move things around, prioritize, see the wood from the trees, and just think in a much better way. So psychologists call this distributed cognition. Basically, the idea is once you can see stuff and move it around, you make better quality decisions. So that's a really good starting point. And then the same kind of principles apply to everything else. So getting your email inbox to zero, a lot of which is, really about cheating, getting the stuff out of the way that is taking up your attention, or, that is in front of your eyeballs that doesn't need to be. It's not just about control A, delete, but it's not far off that. There's a whole chapter in the book called Ninja Email, which is basically step by step how to get your inbox to zero in less than 3 hours. And, it's kind of taking that same approach of how can I get clarity? How can I put my attention onto the right stuff and get control over what I have? That's really the starting point to where then all of those great habits start to feed off.
So let's talk about expectations for a minute, because you kind of said people are like, let's go. And it's hard to kind of take a step back. So how important is it to be realistic with our approach? And then what does that look like? Because I feel like it's, New Year's, let's start a diet, let's start this. And all of a sudden we just fall off the wagon because we become overwhelmed because we don't see any type of growth and we get frustrated and then we just give up.
Yeah. So you mentioned before this idea of being a type A person or being really driven. And I think, most of us are in some way or another, right? And so what that lends itself to is we get hyper ambitious. We want to change the world. We want to do loads of amazing work. We want to be recognized for that. So there's a whole bunch of drivers behind this idea that we should strive and be busy and do more. There was a study a little while ago that looked at the work-life balance approaches and cultures in different countries around the world. And as with a lot of these kind of studies where it's kind of measuring, stress levels and happiness and whatever, the Scandinavian countries did really well and came out on top, saying they had the best work-life balance in the whole world. And they interviewed this guy in Denmark on the news, and they said, hey, what's the key? Why do people in Denmark have such a great work-life balance? And this guy just looked at the interview and just said, well, it's really simple. We just have lower expectations. And I think that's actually a really profound and important lesson.
Yeah.
And I think we can get carried away with setting 100 resolutions and all this kind of stuff, whereas really what's key is focusing on the stuff that really matters and making space for what matters. I quite often say that my definition of productivity is just making space for what matters. And if we can do that, we're really on to a winner. And you asked what it looks like in practice. Well, the hardest thing and the most important discipline, if you're going to have lower expectations and be more, geared around high priorities rather than trying to do everything, is saying no. So we've got to say no in many different ways. We've got to say no to other people and set good boundaries and really be mindful over what's my priorities versus what are these requests that are actually your priorities but not mine. So that kind of interpersonal saying no, really important. We've also got to say no to ourselves, and we've also got to renegotiate the things that we might have already said yes to. So one of the things I talk about is that every week we should be looking at our to-do list and asking ourselves that really important question around, is this the stuff that I thought was a really great idea 3 weeks ago, but isn't now, and I can take it off the list? And I think we're really bad at renegotiating what's on our own list, because it feels like, especially if we've made some kind of public commitment to it, it feels like because we've made a commitment, then we need to follow through. And I think there's something really, I've really learned as I've really practiced and been surrounded by this whole kind of area of productivity for many years, that like getting comfortable enough to say I was wrong there, or that was an idea that I thought was great but actually isn't, or the world has moved on, or I just haven't got round to this and I'm not going to actually admit some of those things and be comfortable enough in yourself to make those kind of proclamations, I think is really valuable. So lowering our expectations, saying no to other people, but also saying no to ourselves, and just recognizing that, there's something really important about doing the right things well and making space for what matters, but not trying to do everything.
Wow, that really is powerful, Graham, especially about renegotiating, because I think I know myself personally, I can attest to just recently kind of being faced with that situation. And I think part of, the questioning for ourselves, if we can kind of backpedal with things, is that, well, if we've made a commitment, it's a form of failure in a sense. Like if I said that I was going to do something, or if I committed to something, and you know what, I think a lot of times we get in trouble because mentally, physically, emotionally, if we're not able to do those things, as you said, that we said we could a couple of weeks ago, things change, life changes, and we need to make sure that we're in good shape to be able to be there for the people around us. So I think that's so crucial for so many people. Let me ask you a little personal question here, because we're talking about trying to be productive, but also the fact that it's not that easy. So can you give us an example maybe where you realize I'm veering off and I'm getting off where I should be, and then all of a sudden, you know what, this happened and this is how I kind of got back there?
Yeah, well, like most people in the world, I'm sure, my phone is one of those, temptations that derailed my productivity. So when I first wrote How to Be a Productivity Ninja back in 2012, 2013, I don't think anything really changed from that point until 5 years later, when my publisher asked me to do a 5-year anniversary edition. And they said, what new would you want to write? And I said, well, actually, none of the key principles of the book have changed. We still have to think in the same way. The only thing that really changed between 2012, 2013 and 2019 was smartphones and the ability of smartphones to derail us by just becoming more addictive, more compelling. So when I did the 5th anniversary edition of the book, which is the one with the green cover, that book has got a whole chapter called How to Stop Messing About on Your Phone. And there's a couple of things that I do that I find really helpful. And the starting point for this is to say that the best and brightest minds in the world right now are sat in Silicon Valley, and they're working for big tech companies. And the currency of those big tech companies is your attention. And their job is to get as much of your attention as possible and then advertise in that space. So once we realize that the brightest minds in the world are out to get us with this and to derail our productivity, then we have to really recognize that willpower is not a very good solution, right? So just to rely on our own willpower doesn't really work. So a couple of things that I do around that. So one is there's a really great app called Forest. So Forest, what you do is you start your work on your Word document or somewhere else, and your phone's over there. And what you're trying to say to yourself is, right, I'm going to focus on this piece of work for 20 minutes, for half an hour, for 40 minutes, whatever the time period is. And then you set that on Forest. So you say on Forest, it's going to be half an hour. And a tree grows on the screen and it takes half an hour to grow. And if at any point you switch away from your Word document or the thing that you're doing and you go and try and check your phone and you go off the Forest app, the tree dies. So it's just this really simple little piece of psychology that says, hey, there's a really good reason not to check my phone, and just puts that in place. And then the next level of that, which is what I do during the mornings, is an app called Freedom. And Freedom is basically an app where you say to yourself, I'm going to treat myself like an absolute child, and I'm going to set the rules, and I'm going to make it impossible for me to check stuff. So in the mornings, my phone will not let me access certain websites like the BBC football website and, Twitter and
Wow.
Instagram. It all blocks, right? And it's actually really difficult to turn it off. So basically, once you realize that you're stuck and it won't work, you just kind of think to yourself, oh, and that mindfulness hits that says, hey, I was trying to derail myself there. That was a stupid idea. Let's get back to the thing. So those are just really simple tools that you can use. Forest and Freedom. There are other Freedom's a paid app, and there are other things that will do it for free, like off time, quality time. There's like different ones that you can use for free if you don't want to pay.
Yeah.
But Freedom, I think, cost me about $60 or something when I bought it, and that was a lifetime subscription. And I can't tell you how many hours of my life I've got back by not derailing my own productivity with that. So it feels like a very good investment for a lot of people. But yeah, we've really got to recognize those things that derail us. I love talking about my own failures because it feels like, A, because it's sort of cheap therapy. But B, I think people I really noticed after I first released Productivity Ninja that it sort of felt like a rod that I created for my own back. Everyone expected me to be on time. Everybody expected every day to be hyper productive. And, many days are. But, it kind of gave me this sort of platform and expectation where I was just kind of unable to ever have any wiggle room to fail. And so I think it's a really important message to give to people to say that everybody screws this up. Ninjas are human and not superhero. And therefore, we will all have days where it doesn't go well. And we're all fallible and we're all weird. And there's lots that we need to do to keep an eye and be mindful of our imperfections.
That's great. And I love those two apps. I will be looking that up. And as you said, $60 for a lifetime, regardless if it's changed or not. But time is money. So think about how much more money, if we're just talking from a business standpoint, but time is the most precious commodity for life. I mean, that's time that if you're not working on your company or your business, you're working on your family, you're working on self-care. It's worth its weight in gold. So I can't let you go without having people learn a little bit about some upcoming projects, and one that really has my heart because we cannot have enough kindness in this world. And you are working on something that's pretty special that revolves around that. Tell us about that.
Yes. So I'm just finishing up a book. So there's no publication date for this, but you'll be able to find some more details on my website, depending on when you're watching this, in the future. But basically the book is called Kind and the subtitle is "Why Caring Leaders Triumph in a Competitive World." And the premise is really simple. We are fascinated as a culture by what I call in the book the business bastard, right? So you think Donald Trump, Elon Musk, over here in the UK, for many years it was, the Richard Bransons, all these kind of business figures who become very larger than life, tend to have attached to their story something along the lines of, there was a time in their life where they really screwed people over, or there was a time in their life where they were slightly evil. And we tend to associate, when you think of, Elizabeth Holmes over the last few years, and so many of these stories, and Steve Jobs, going back a few years before that, he was very famed for shouting at his employees, dressing people down in front of the whole organization, and so on. And we tend to associate these hyper successful people with bad behavior and this idea of the business bastard. And it becomes almost a fulfilling prophecy where the people who behave in that kind of slightly less kind way become successful. And basically the whole book is about saying that is actually not true. There are thousands of stories of people who have got where they are today by being ultra kind. And behind most of those figures that I just mentioned, there's a whole team of people acting with kindness to mop up all the mess that they've left behind. Those people are examples of survivorship bias. They're outliers, and they're not the full story. But actually, the full story, that actually kindness and empathy are the things that help to build trust, help to build psychological safety in organizations. And we all know that when we have psychologically safe organizations, they're more productive, more creative, better retention, better happiness, all of this stuff. What happens is that those people who set up organizations around psychological safety and achieve great things don't necessarily have as compelling as a story to make it into the newspapers, because no one's being screwed over. There's no big, there's kind of something cinematic about the idea of the business bastard and these kind of baddie figures. And the corresponding stories about personal kindness are interesting, but then less newsworthy, and they're less remarkable, and they just don't quite get the levels of kind of press or interest. And there's something just quite interesting and compelling about those kind of business sort of baddie stories that we secretly quite like, actually, too. So the book is really starting from that premise and saying, how can we be kinder? Think Productive, which is my company, one of our corporate values, which we've had for many years, is trust and kindness are our rocket fuel. And we believe that by always giving people the benefit of the doubt, by really focusing on high trust as the thing that greases the wheel of every single transaction, it removes the need for due diligence, then we're super successful. So this is something that I've been kind of doing in the way we've built our organizations around the world. We've been doing it day to day, and I've never really talked about it. I've talked about it on a few when I've done corporate keynotes, and I've been asked in the Q&A, what are what's the secret sauce of your organization, or like, what's your leadership style? I'll quite often bring kindness into that. But I really wanted to shine a light on the idea of kindness in leadership and what I'm calling kindful leadership. And so it feels like in some ways it's a very similar end point to Productivity Ninja, in the sense that what really kindness encourages leads to incredible levels of performance. But in many other ways, it feels like a very different kind of book, and it feels like a very different kind of space that I'm entering with this book. It's been a real journey, and a lot of self-reflection, and just a fascinating sort of research process to write it. And over the next year or so, what I'm hoping to do is build a whole sort of ecosystem around this idea of kind and kindful leadership. Ultimately, they'll be quite open source. So the idea is there'll be loads of stuff that I'm just going to give away for free, practice what I preach in terms of that kindness, but really kind of build the infrastructure and the ecosystem to help people to have really practical ways to instill kindness in their organization.
I love it. I love it. I love it, because we can't get enough of it. And we talked about this off camera. Coming from a news background, that's basically what we focus on 99%, maybe down to 95%, with some news agencies, but there's so much good out there. Sometimes it's harder to find, but it is out there. And the more kindness we have in this world, just the better it is for everybody. And the thing is too, you look at quality of life again, when you are getting to the top of whatever business field you're in, how happy can you be when you're doing it in a way that you're stepping on people? I remember hearing when you step on those people to get up the ladder, you're going to face those same people coming back down the ladder. It's just kill them with kindness. Yeah. It just can't get enough kindness in this world. Graham Allcott, he is the author of How to Be a Productivity Ninja, and you definitely want to pick up that book. I have 2 copies, but you can't have my copy because that's my loan-out copy and my personal copy. He also wrote How to Have Energy, which we didn't even talk about, which we could all use some more energy. How to Be a Study Ninja, How to Fix Meetings, if that's your thing, and especially we're doing meetings in a different way now. And then we've got that new book to look forward to. You can go to grahamallcott.com for all the information on everything that Graham is working on. Of course, he is a public speaker and entrepreneur, and is also very involved in community and charitable events too. So please check out his website, grahamallcott.com. Graham, such a pleasure to, I would say, see you again, but the last time it was a radio interview, so we didn't actually get to see each other face to face, but such a joy having you. Love the information. I need to go back and take notes and of course pick up the book and open up the book again, but great information. And I love your heart too, because it's not just about business. It's about really having an impact in the world that's going to make the world a little bit better. So thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Real pleasure, Michelle. Thank you.